Welcome to the Get Real Movies podcast. My name is Daniel Chadwick Schubert. I'm your host, and this is a very special episode, a start of a new series. We're going to be interviewing people who make independent films. I know that we really focus on true story films here on the podcast, but obviously I think something near and dear to my heart is independent film, and that's where I started very much, meeting lots of different independent filmmakers at different film festivals like the Toronto International Film Festival, the Kingston Film Festival, the London Film Festival, and many ones like that. So I'm very, very happy to introduce my first guest today. He is the director behind the new released Frankie Freako, and I'm very happy to be talking to him about that and about his career in film as a whole. And that is Stephen Kostanski. Welcome, Stephen. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. The listeners won't see this, but I see lots of different film props behind you. Is it fair to say that film is very much your life?
Yeah, I mean, I work as a prosthetics and creature effects artist when I'm not directing movies. So pretty much every minute of every day is consumed by something film related, whether I'm making monsters, making prosthetics, or making movies. You know, that's what I love to do. I love making monsters and I love putting them on screen. So that's anything I can do to perpetuate that, I will do it.
Well, that's the way to do it. I know a lot of people can't say really that they're doing something they love every minute of every day, but I get the feeling when I talk to filmmakers that they can say that pretty truthfully, that they're doing something they love almost every day.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a job. Like, I don't want people to get the misconception that it's like constant fun. It's like making films is a very stressful undertaking. It's a huge ask of people and of a director, writer, director, and their crew. But yeah, I love the chaos of it. I love the ambition of it. I really love making movies that punch above their weight. And above their budgets, because the problem-solving component is such a crucial part of filmmaking to me. And it's similarly to creature effects and prosthetics, half the fun is just figuring out how to do the stuff, or how to create a monster that you've never seen before, create a film that's never been seen before. So there's a lot of problem-solving that comes with that, and it can be very hectic and stressful and tiring, but it's fun at the same time.
For sure. I guess for me, one of the questions I'd want to ask before we get into Frankie Freako is, tell me a little bit about your history in the film industry, because I know you have a long history in it. And like you said, there's many different hats you've had to wear. So I guess where did it start with you, this love of film? Was it something that was there as a kid, or is it something that kind of sprung out in your teenage years, or just tell me a little bit about your history with film?
For as long as I can remember, I've been a creative guy. I was very creative as a kid. I loved doing arts and crafts. Any excuse to do like dioramas and things in school, I would take it. But I didn't really know that filmmaking was the avenue for me until I was in my early teens. Making movies, and especially like creatures and prosthetics for movies, was always seemed like such an out there concept as a career choice. As a kid, you just associate it with this concept of Hollywood. It's just this thing that a kid in Winnipeg, Manitoba is never going to get to in any way. But then, I started seeing behind the scenes videos of the visual effects process behind different movies. There's a show called Movie Magic that used to be on in the 90s that I loved. And it was all about the behind the scenes inner workings of the Star Wars movies. I remember an episode specifically about Empire Strikes Back, and there's one about Spawn, and just like effects heavy movies. But the turning point was Army of Darkness. I watched it for the first time when I was 13 at a sleepover, and it really blew my mind because it was such a bizarre movie to experience, having not really experienced a movie like it before, because it's so silly and outlandish and it really embraces various effects techniques that maybe don't necessarily look hyper realistic, but they're fun and exciting and interesting. And it was fun, like seeing a movie with its imagination on full display, seeing Sam Raimi's imagination just going wild. And so as a kid, it was a real turning point for me, because I realized, like, oh, there's like just seeing movies like that were weird and kind of offbeat somehow made it more accessible. But also watching the behind the scenes of Army of Darkness, which was on the end of that VHS tape at the time. Like, they didn't have DVDs with bonus features yet, so sometimes they would put making ofs on the VHS after the film finished. And so watching the making of Army of Darkness and seeing all these guys in like heavy metal shirts with long hair, like just kind of goofing off in an effect shop making rubber monsters, it really clicked for me as like realizing, like, oh, this is potentially a career choice. Like, those look like relatively normal to me, like fun dudes that I'd want to hang out with. It suddenly became accessible, where I was like, oh, like, if those guys can do it, I can do it. And so that's what got me started on this path of like figuring out how to make movies, and then in turn how to make monsters for my own movies. Because I saw that there is like inherently like a DIY component to all of it. To go back to the problem solving I was talking about before, it's like at whatever level of filmmaking you're at, it's all problem solving, whether it's a small movie or a big movie. And so, yeah, that was like a real gateway drug for me into the adventure of making films.
That's a good way to put it. Gateway drug. Filmmaking, I've realized over, the last 10 years that I've been kind of around the film industry. I've done a few of my own things, but mainly it's been just reviewing and talking to different people. But also, I just have to say, for some of our younger listeners, I think I might be the last age that knows what VHS tapes are, or at least remembers using them. Because I remember, having to rewind them myself if you wanted to rewatch them. Otherwise, they'd be at the end. That's, I don't think I ever saw special features at the end, but that's one of my favorite things. I have a bunch of Blu-rays, and it's one of my favorite things to do when you really find a film you really love, to just watch how they made it. I remember the first time I probably did it was with Inception, and seeing how they made the revolving kind of hotel, and the time was shifting and everything like that, and it's all practical effects. It's just a real marvel to witness, I guess.
Well, and I also get people asking me like, oh, like when you peek behind the curtain and you see all this stuff and you see how they do it, doesn't that like ruin the magic of movies? And for me, it's the opposite effect. Like, I love seeing the what it took to get to what's on screen, because it's always fascinating to me. It's always like a more roundabout way to get there than you would think. It's never a straight line. And just seeing people's like innovation at work in a lot of these movies, especially like peak practical effects eras like 70s, 80s, and 90s, where they're really like honing the craft. And even just like the early digital stuff I find really fascinating, like in the late 90s, when they started integrating CG a lot more, like post The Abyss, post T2 and Jurassic Park. It's a very janky era where it's like not 100% convincing, but I love watching them try to figure out how to like bring this stuff to life, and still utilizing practical effects at the same time. It's like fun seeing them juggle the two in the late 90s. So yeah, I find my passion for film has not softened at all, being in the industry and also just from seeing how they do all this stuff. I think it's just, I love everything about it, from beginning to end, what's on screen and what's behind the curtain. It's all endlessly fascinating to me.
Well, it's really funny you mentioned that, because it's the same with me. It doesn't deter the magic at all. When I was a kid and watched animations like Wallace and Gromit and Chicken Run, and even as I got a little older, Fantastic Mr. Fox, the way they did that with the stop animation and just using clay, and it's just amazing to learn how they did that, and it looks so good on the screen. And I totally agree. It doesn't get rid of the magic at all. I guess this leads me into asking about your film. you have a long history with films, and you've made your own features, and you've done a lot of work in other departments as well. But what was it like making Frankie Freako? Especially, tell me a little bit about the process behind it, and how long did it take, and how did it all come together, I guess, because I know you wrote this and directed it yourself.
Yeah, well, the story behind Frankie Freako is a pretty brief one, because I was actually gearing up to make a completely different project, and that project ended up getting pushed by almost a year, and so I had this gap of time in my schedule, and my choices were like, well, do I go to set and just do daily work doing prosthetics, or do I quickly write another movie and fill that gap with the real low budget thing? And so I had been watching little monster movies with my director of photography on the film, Pierce Dirks, and he was streaming every tiny monster movie there is, like all the Gremlins, the Critters, the Ghoulies, the Munchies, all of it. And as we were watching it, we were riffing on like, well, what would it look like if we made something like this? And that was like really what sparked it. I was like, oh yeah, I'll make like a thing about a guy being terrorized by little puppets. Like, how hard could that be? Not realizing that making a movie with puppets is actually very hard and very complicated. And I definitely learned my lesson. But yeah, that was basically the genesis of it. And then watching, aside from watching all the little monster movies, I was also watching compilations of phone ads from the 80s and 90s. And there was a few ads that really stuck with me. There was this one called Freddie Freaker that was like a little goblin guy offering up like a hotline that you could call. But then I was watching that in conjunction with like phone sex ads where you'd call to like, chat up a sexy lady. And I got in my head of like, well, wouldn't it be funny if you like combine those two and it's like kind of a sexy ad for a goblin dude? Like, it was just such an absurd idea that that it really helped spark the rest of the premise of the movie. So yeah, that was really the genesis of it. And then it was a very quick turnaround from throwing the script down on the table with all the producers sitting around being like, here's the movie I want to make, to like, was it 4 months later, we're on set shooting it. So it was, pretty tight timeline on this one. Not a lot of money, but we went into it knowing that. We went into it knowing like this is going to be like a low risk investment for our financiers. We're all kind of taking a hit on it, but we are making an insane puppet comedy. So we have free reign to do what we want. There's really no oversight from the higher ups. We just had free reign to do whatever we wanted. So it was a lot of fun.
That's what you want in a film is free reign and kind of a blank, not a blank check, but a blank slate to sort of go with it. I found it interesting because it was very much in the vein of those little monster movies that you mentioned before, Gremlins and such. But I also kind of, especially at the start, but a little bit throughout the film, I sort of got an Office Space sort of vibe at the start, at least, where it was just very quirky sort of office humor. And it wasn't the movie I expected when I came in. So in the process of writing this, when did you decide, okay, even though it is a little monster movie, I'm not going to go, full Sam Raimi R-rated either. I'm going to kind of play with the lines a little bit here.
I mean, the intention was always to mix genres. I also always wanted it to be like a relatively PG movie. I don't know. I just find it's easy to go off the rails and make things super violent and crass. And I just don't, there's like no imagination to that for me. I feel like it's way more, it's almost like more offensive to withhold those things nowadays and have like no swearing at all. But still make a movie that's insane, that this movie definitely will frustrate some audience members in how absurd it gets. It really like bends reality at times and like has no regard for logic. But yeah, it definitely like went in with the intention of starting it sort of level and grounded, like grounded in air quotes, but like I always want it to be like start off like one movie, and then at the end it's a completely different movie. All my movies are like that. I love pulling the rug out from under people like every time we switch acts, just so by the time you get to the end, you're left with this feeling of like, I don't know how I got here. This was not the movie I walked into. And so, yeah, even in like the style of shooting, the location, the way we lit it, like the first 10, 15 minutes looks very specific. It looks more like a kind of cheap 90s thriller. And then once the Freakos show up, we switch gears and it gets way more bombastic. The lighting gets more absurd. The angles get more absurd. We did a lot of Dutch angles, a lot of slider, like kind of push-ins with Dutch angles. And yeah, we just really like switched it up as the movie progressed and just tried to escalate with each scene and just make the movie more and more insane.
Well, I feel like this is a movie that goes from 0 to 50 to 100 to 1,000. Like after the start, it never drops off for a second. It's just go, go, go. It's I was trying to rack my brain for a movie that was like it. It just kept me on edge the entire time, where I was a little bit like, I can't relax right now.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of, to go back to Sam Raimi, I was a little inspired by like Evil Dead 2 or even the first Evil Dead. Like the way those movies escalate, I really admire. I feel like there's such a great template for how to make a crazy genre movie. They never get boring. They're always every scene is like one-upping the previous scene. And so I did use that as a bit of inspiration for this, where like I wanted it to be a roller coaster. I wanted it to just keep getting crazier and crazier. And it was also the reason why I kept it tight too. Like it's 82 minutes, which I wish more genre movies would be that length, because I think it allows you to have that roller coaster kind of crescendo without exhausting people to the point that they're not interested anymore. Like the movie ramps up, it hits hard, and then it's over, and you're out before you know it. And so that was very deliberate because it's so insane. I did not want to overwork the audience.
Yeah, that's fair. I definitely felt not too short, but it definitely felt short. I was surprised when it ended. I was like, oh, it's done. Like, especially when you see there's only a few minutes left. But I guess one of my final questions for you would be, when it comes to working with puppets, and you mentioned that these are puppets, what was the process behind that in terms of, you know, how much CGI is used, how much is puppet masters? It would be nice to know how that translates on the screen a little bit for the for the listeners and people who are watching.
I mean, we used a lot of techniques for this. There's a lot of like hand puppetry for when the puppets are talking. There's a little bit of animatronics sprinkled throughout. There is some CG enhancement, mostly just eye blinks that I added just to give the puppets a little bit more life. And then, yeah, like rod puppetry in some cases. So like there's wide shots where they're moving around, and like we would get plate shots of the background. The camera would be locked off. We'd get a plate shot. Then we'd operate the puppets, and you'd see the puppeteer in the frame, and then we'd go in and paint them out after the fact.
Wow.
So yeah, it was multiple techniques. And then like the minecart chase that shows up later, that's all stop motion. There's a bunch of stop motion throughout the movie as well. A lot of like hand-drawn animation, like the optical effects is all hand-drawn by me as well. Wow. To try and emulate that like 80s lightning effect that every movie used to have that looks so cool that we don't have anymore. So yeah, it was like a lot of old school effects mixed with a little bit of modern day techniques as well.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. It gave me a sort of the same aesthetic and vibe as some of those 80s movies that I love. Weird Science kind of came to mind a little bit.
Oh, perfect. That's a great one.
And a few others, but it was weird because it just switched. I don't know if tones is the right word, but it switched themes a few times, but it was noticeable. And it wasn't distracting in that way, where I didn't find it like took me out of the film. It just it was something you noticed as you went through the film, and then you were like, oh, okay, we're in a different vibe now. Like the start was very different from the finish.
Well, I tried to draw attention to that too with certain moments. Like there's times where you'll be in one type of movie, but then like somebody will get a phone call and the other end of the phone call will be shot like the previous style of movie, just to like remind you that other like certain characters only exist in this like thriller world, while other characters only exist in the like silly puppet comedy world. And so I tried to like show like the disparity between those two worlds as often as I could by having them collide, sometimes in the same scene, where it would be two sides of one conversation, but one side looks one way and the other side looks a different way, just to like, yeah, really drive the point home with the audience.
Yeah, it was really well done. I quite enjoyed it, and but where's this going to be available for people who won't be able to get to theaters?
I mean, I don't actually have the VOD info yet. I know that Raven Banner just put out the physical media release for pre-order now. I'm sure Shout Factory in the US will be putting theirs out soon. Okay. So it will be available on physical release. As far as VOD and streaming, unfortunately don't have that date yet. We're kind of just taking it one step at a time. Because we're doing a theatrical run in conjunction with film festivals as well. So I know it's playing a few more festivals over the next couple months. But yes, by the end of the year, I anticipate physical media will be out, and in conjunction with that, VOD on probably most platforms.
Cool. Well, I will make sure to put in the link for anyone who is listening. The theaters it is playing here in Canada, and I'll see if I can find the US as well. And then I'll keep people updated. But Stephen, thank you so much for being our inaugural guest talking about independent film. It's really refreshing to talk to someone who is just has his hands in all different facets of the film industry, but also you still get to, although this is a passion project, it sounds like you put this together rather quickly, which makes it even more enjoyable for me. And thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was great chatting with you.
Yeah. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And everyone, please go check out Frankie Freako in theaters now and in digital and physical release towards the end of the year. Thanks so much.